All right, welcome everyone to another Enertiv Office Hours. We'll give everyone a minute or two to file in, but great to see everyone here. Excited for today's discussion, and we'll kick things off shortly. Cool. Looks like some people are joining. That's great. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Tell us what type of portfolio you work for, any other details that might be interesting. All right, let's get started. So, welcome to another Enertiv Office Hours. For those who have not joined an Enertiv Office Hours before, it's kind of like a webinar, just less boring. We want this to be as interactive as possible. We will answer questions on the fly. We've put together a short presentation that'll help guide the conversation, but we hope this will be educational, but it'll also be interactive and a little bit of fun. My name is Kamli Wilson. I host Enertiv Office Hours. Today with me, I have Felix Lipov. Felix is our lead software engineer here at Enertiv. You want to introduce yourself, Felix?
Oh, hey, thanks, Kami. I've been with Enertiv for almost 10 years working on making data actionable, valuable across commercial real estate. So ESG is not new, but new to many. So I'm looking forward to talk with Kami about what we can do to help educate everybody about value we can create ESG.
Awesome. Cool. So today's topic is just that. A lot of portfolios have put in place what we're calling ESG 1.0, and we'll go into what that looks like, but it's really high-level reporting, benchmarking, the infrastructure that you need to report on your ESG metrics. ESG 2.0 is where we take that a step further, and we actually affect change so that we can improve our scores, improve our efficiency, and improve our outcomes. Okay, so we're talking about ESG 1.0 to start, and truthfully, we're really talking about the E. We're not going to dive into the S and the G today. We're going to keep it focused on those environmental and sustainability metrics. And while there are some metrics around physical climate risk and other things, so much of ESG 1.0, that's high level of reporting, comes from our utility bills. That's the basis of the data that everybody is reporting on. That data is generally making its way into Energy Star Portfolio Manager. We're rolling that up. We're calculating the emissions based off the consumption that our buildings are consuming from a utility perspective. Side note, if any part of that process is either totally manual, meaning that property teams are physically inputting utility data into Energy Star, or it's fully automated, meaning only robots transmit the data from the utilities to Energy Star, there should be a hybrid approach. It should be based heavily off software and robots, but it should be QA'd by humans. The SEC is coming down with guidelines saying that this data has to be auditable. So we want to make sure that it's verifiable and super accurate. But that's kind of a side tangent. Generally, portfolios have taken this data and set really, really ambitious targets and goals. They've said by 2038, we want to be net zero. We want our buildings to emit as little carbon as possible. And for that carbon that we do emit, we want it to be covered by other sources. The question is, how do we get there? What is the path to get from where we are today to that future state in which we have net zero emissions. Before we move on, I like this little joke. For $1 million, I can help you improve your ESG rank. Don't you own an independent ESG rating service? I didn't say it would be hard. Now, the truth is that ESG 2.0, actually improving ESG rankings, doesn't have to be hard, but it's definitely not going to be easy, right? ESG 2.0 is about doing something about it, about improving those rankings. And speaking of the easy way out, there's this thought out there that net zero is not necessarily a scam, but you can just buy net zero, right? You just take your carbon emissions and you purchase the equivalent amount of offsets, and then you're net zero. Great. We would advise against relying too much on this strategy. There are an increasing number of reports out there where the underlying projects for these carbon offsets are being questioned. This is one example where the scientist is claiming that this carbon offset project is receiving 30 times more credits than it should be. So we don't want to rely on this strategy because the underlying assets are coming into question. You don't want the whole strategy to collapse like a deck of cards, like mortgage-backed securities or something of the ilk. So we need a better strategy. We need a better action plan. That action plan does require some focus. It's not easy, but it's totally achievable. So this is what we've seen. We talk with commercial real estate portfolios every day. The most sophisticated owners and operators are putting together an action plan that often looks like this. They'll take their baseline emissions, start with operational improvements. There's generally a lot of waste in just how buildings are run. So let's clean that up. Let's optimize how our buildings are running from their baseline. Let's engage tenants. Tenants make up a huge portion of a building's consumption, but they're not within the control of the landlord. So we need a strategy that engages tenants, that incentivizes them to reduce their own loads. But even if we get operational improvements, even if we engage tenants, there's only so much we can do from optimization and behavior change. There are gonna have to be investments into the portfolio, into the critical infrastructure. So purchasing high performance equipment and purchasing electrification of that equipment will be critical to actually achieving those ESG goals. So here's the action plan. We're going to dive into each section of the action plan now. We're going to start with our on-site teams, our property teams. Now, most portfolios have basically experienced a bell curve in terms of performance. They have a few engineers who are really, really good, who run a really tight ship and don't really have any areas for improvement. Then they have the vast majority of their engineers who are good, they're average, there's definitely room for improvement, but nothing's, their operating expenses are not, orders of magnitude different than the mean. And then there are kind of those low performers who have no idea what's going on in the building, who are often running systems 24/7 and really wasting a lot of operating expenses. Our goal here is to shift that whole bell curve to the right. So there are more outstanding performers, the average is improved, and there are far fewer low performers. How do we do this? Well, there's this idea of an energy treasure hunt, right? So let's create a program where building operators are incentivized and there's infrastructure in place to help them identify potential areas for energy efficiency. The problem with this strategy is let's dive in here. Phase one, 6 weeks out from a treasure hunt, we need to schedule discussions. The first day of the planned treasure hunt, now we're doing a 3-day on-site event. And then after that, we're developing a schedule to pursue the opportunities we've identified. Why doesn't this work? Raise your hand if your building operators have time for this. Raise your hand if they're just sitting around twiddling their thumbs and they just need something to do. That's not the case. What we need to do to bring on-site operators into this ESG journey is to create time for them. We need to give them their time back. Let's see how. Okay, so say chilled water pump number 2 on the roof needs a part replaced. The normal process is go up to the roof, read the nameplate, go back to the office, look up the information there, find the parts manual somewhere else in the office, and order the part. Now, operators spend 16% of their day just looking for information, and then another 30% on administrative tasks, just reporting up and down the organization. What if we could, with one click, go directly from this chilled water pump to its parts list, and you can call the vendor directly? That's how you engage operators. You deliver value to them first before asking them to do anything new, right? So we have our operators engaged. Now let's talk about tenant engagement. Oh, before we jump forward, I love this quote from Sarah Neff, good friend of Enertiv. She runs sustainability over at Lendlease. She said, "A building can only run as efficiently as the engineer knows how to run it. Unless you have an engineer first mindset, none of your energy efficiency efforts are ever going to reap the rewards." We think that's absolutely right. We think that an engineer first mindset is how you're gonna, it's the foundation for everything else that comes after this from an operational improvement perspective. Now let's talk about engaging tenants. We're talking about yoga, right? We're talking about ordering coffee. We're talking about walking the dog. No. Tenant engagement, when it comes to ESG, it's really important to recognize that commercial tenants have their own ESG goals and reporting requirements. And if you thought the utility bills that you're getting are bad, try looking at a tenant's utility consumption for their offices across a bunch of different spaces. They're getting sub-meter bills from a bunch of different vendors. These are almost impossible to read. Some poor person over there has to try to decipher these and manually input this into their reporting software. There's no technology out there that'll do this for them. It's a really, really difficult process. And you know, there's so much talk about engaging tenants, but we should be providing them with a premium experience as it comes to their ESG needs, right? So how can this be better? Let's give them a portal where all their bills live in one place. They can download the data. They can easily report out from here. We've, again, added value to them upfront before asking them to do anything new. At the same time, now that we've created some goodwill and created some buy-in, we can give them transparency. We can say, hey, you know, you're ranked 34 out of 34 for our tenants. You're paying $5.28 a square foot more than the average tenant. Giving both the landlord transparency on on who to talk to and the tenant transparency on where they stand within their building can really drive the behavior change that's going to impact those ESG scores. And, Felix makes this point all the time. It doesn't matter if your tenants are triple net leased. It doesn't matter if you have no control. You are still being judged on your building's overall performance. So this engaging tenants piece is absolutely critical. But even if we engage tenants and we engage operators, there are still issues that we have to overcome if we're going to hit those goals. So from that operational improvement perspective, there's a really common phenomenon that happens in commercial real estate where an energy audit will occur and then there will be retro commissioning. Basically, after an energy audit, they'll identify all the issues in the building, tune it up, and improve efficiency. Let's go baseline efficiency from 100, baseline consumption from 100 to 75. Great. Now we've projected that we're going to stay there, but what actually happens is that those improvements slowly drift back to the mean, right? Why does that happen? Well, let's take one little example. We've got an energy profile of one piece of equipment here. You can see it's running on a schedule, and then all of a sudden, a tenant calls and they say, hey, March 13th, I need overtime HVAC, right? And then usually the system is running overtime and it just stays that way. And you multiply that by dozens of pieces of equipment, hundreds of pieces of equipment, and you're losing all the efficiency you got from that energy audit tune-up. What we want to do, monitor each piece of equipment, and as soon as we recognize that it's not adhering to its normal schedule, notify the operators and have them fix that so that very, very quickly we get back into that schedule and we don't experience that performance drift. Really, really critical. But as we said before, all the behavior change and operational improvements will only get us so far. We need to make investments. These investments usually come from the same place, that energy audit, right? Not only will they tell you the low-hanging fruit and the tune-ups that should happen, but also the projects and investments that you could make to reduce your energy consumption, right? So you'll get a laundry list of options. You'll see the payback period and the net benefits and what you'll get after rebates and all these great things. The problem is that in the background, the asset managers and the engineers are working off, property condition assessments. They're looking to replace equipment that's ended its useful life. That is not necessarily in line with the energy audit. These are two different processes. And while we're doing those evaluations onto what retrofits and upgrades we can make, a lot of these pieces of equipment are being replaced in kind. The big issue with that is that they have expected useful lives of 15, 20, 25 years. So every single time any property in the portfolio is doing an in-kind replacement, basically taking what's already there and replacing it with the same thing, you're locking that property into higher than necessary baseline efficiency for 15, 20 years, and you're undercutting your ability to hit those really aggressive goals. So what we want to do, we talked about a second ago, the real-time monitoring of equipment. This can flow directly into the capital planning as well. So we have the lifetime operating costs of each piece of equipment. not only in that building, not only in the portfolio, but across the industry. Those efficiency upgrades can be targeted based off what the real-time data is telling us instead of a kind of a snapshot in time. And then they can flow into the actual capital plan directly. Instead of living somewhere else with some other team, we want to combine this process so that capital planning and the efficiency upgrades that have to happen to reach these goals are one and the same, right? And at the same time, while we want to do upgrades to higher efficiency equipment, we also need to keep in mind that we should be erring towards electrification. This is not perfect, but it's the best strategy that the world has come up with to meet decarbonization goals. Now, obviously, the commercial real estate landlords will need help from the grid itself, right? If the grid doesn't decarbonize, then going electric won't help very much. But if we remain on, oil-based, propane-based boilers and water heaters and these strategies, again, we're locking ourselves in to those emissions, to fossil fuel consumption for the long term, for another 15, 20, 25 years. Okay, so we've gotten to the end. What we didn't talk about, now there's scope 1 emissions. These are those emissions from the gas-fired boiler on site. There are scope 2 emissions. That's from electricity that's purchased from the grid. And then there's scope 3 emissions. We didn't cover those. Those are indirect emissions from things like employee travel and sources like that. We also didn't cover embodied carbon. That is carbon that is emitted in the process of creating the materials that go into building the building itself. So those are both really interesting topics that deserve their own Enertiv Office Hours at some point, but we couldn't cover them here. What else did we miss? We'd love to hear from you guys. Feel free to chat. Feel free to reach out to us afterwards. We know that this is a really solid action plan. We've seen it work before at scale for really sophisticated and diverse portfolios, but I'm sure we missed something. So feel free to reach out to us anytime, and we appreciate your time now. Any last thoughts, Felix?
No, I think you covered it. Kept it short and sweet, the way I like it. So thank you again for all the explanation. But the devil's in the details. The key thing is start acting on it now in order to anticipate the future.
Well said. Thank you, everyone. We will send out a recording of this later today. And always feel free to reach out to us if you have any follow-up questions. Have a good day. Talk to you soon.